Yeah,
Aha!
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
That's progress of some sort.
Defeated the gremlins for now.
Hi everyone. How are you?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
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 we can hear everybody now. Fab.
Nice to meet you all.
yeah,
You
and
too,
you.
like finally.
Right?
likewise.
Are other people listening to this live?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, hi.
Yeah,
Hi, other people.
Jay, do you want to sort of take over now that we've got the gremlins settled?
yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Gary, for for
Cool.
for doing this at the last moment. So, hi everyone. Welcome back to this different version of Jai Thakkar show. And today, as mentioned, we have our three panelists: Eric Kaplan, uh, Professor David Webster, and Dr. Gary. Uh, so it's an honor to have all three of you. And first of all, so thank you so much for doing this at this point of time. It's midnight in UK, so thank you, David and Gary, for doing this at
Oh, it's
midnight,
fine.
and thank you, Eric, for giving us your time. So we'll be talking about philosophy. We'll be talking about Kierkegaard, Santa, Buddhist philosophy, bits of Indian philosophy. But before that, I would like to just give every one of you some chance to introduce yourself. So, if in case I have missed any information, uh, all of us can know each other better. So, we'll start with Eric.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Kaplan. I'm a comedy writer in Hollywood, and I also have a side hustle as a philosopher. I have a PhD from Berkeley in philosophy. I've written a book called Does Santa Exist? A philosophical investigation, and I co-host a podcast with Taylor Carmen called Philosophical, no, scary, terrifying questions and how not to be terrified by them. That's what it's called. And thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I'm Dave, as I said, and I've spent the last 20 plus years probably teaching philosophy, amongst other things, and the study of religion at various places. And I'm kind of interested in everything, which is a kind of major problem for an academic career. You're meant to be interested in one thing to the exclusion of everything else. So my major obstacle is being too interested in too many things. So I look forward to talking about some of those. So breadth and shallow is my knowledge rather than rich and deep, but that should become obvious as we talk.
And then my savior for the last moment, Gary.
Yeah, I understand that about being too interested in everything. Yeah, so I'm Gary Donnelly, PhD philosophy, PGC in religion. Taught a lot. Spend more time teaching than do researching. Really, my major interest is Buddhist philosophy, but Indian philosophy, full stop. Sanskrit stuff, Pali stuff.
Well, I
Brilliant,
think this is
brilliant.
really fun. I'm happy to spend some time with the three of you.
Me too. It's awesome.
Likewise, likewise. So, I mean, starting off with Kierkegaard, and I just want to sort of introduce Kierkegaard as a philosopher for a lot of our audience, and then I think we can start off uh, with some more intellectual adventure on his ideas. So basic and like you guys are free to just interrupt me and tell me that this is wrong, this is the correct thing. So so basically, he's considered father of existentialism, and it's and his basic idea or his big idea is like that you are not born with any predefined purpose. You are not just a cog in a machine. Instead, like you have the freedom to sort of choose who you are and what life means to you, to add the meaning to your
Mm.
life.
No, I don't
And
think that's
this
correct. That's a position that Kierkegaard actually doesn't
Mhm.
accept. That's the position that he ascribes to a stage of existence called the ethical sphere. But he considers that people like that are kidding themselves, because he says if you had the freedom to define yourself any way you wanted, you could then change into something opposite tomorrow. So your life would have no meaning. It would have no substance to it. So
Mm.
that's not actually his view. Um, if you permit me to say, I think there's a few important discoveries associated with Kierkegaard, and I think the most important one is the idea that even if you knew everything you could possibly know, there would still be sort of fundamental answers remaining in your life, which is, what does that have to do for me? What do I care about? What matters to me? And that's really his extremely important insight. He has a lot of other stuff which is interesting, which I don't know if we should get into the weeds on. But I think that's the critical insight of Kierkegaard in the Western tradition. He sort of follows in the footsteps of an earlier thinker named Pascal. But Kierkegaard is the one who really brings what's called the existential question front and center, and that's why he's considered the founder of a movement called existentialism.
I mean, yeah, if I try briefly jump in, I kind of agree with all of that. I think what's kind of interesting about the kind of context of Kierkegaard is he thinks there's no amount of information we can acquire or scientific certainty that will answer those fundamental questions. They're going to be left. And that, one thing that dominates Mr. Kierkegaard's writing is this kind of anxiety and dread and the sickness unto death, as he talks about, that because there's no kind of simple way or scientific way or kind of leaning back on the Enlightenment's idea that somehow we would kind of be encyclopedic enough, as it were, to kind of put all that together, and then we won't any intellectual problems. It's a real antidote to that kind of naive way of thinking about the kind of problems of life. It really starts out in dread and realization of that, and obviously goes on. We might talk about later on about what his kind of understanding of faith is and how that may or may not solve that. But it really starts out by saying you can't just learn more stuff, get more degrees, read more books, do more experiments, and then you'll know what life means. You'll still be left with this kind of yawning gap of meaning that still sits in front of you, which is why he seems that, despite being religious, and like many atheist existentialists, so fundamental to the development of that kind of idea of the kind of predicament we're left in life without a kind of be able to answer everything and know everything in that way. So yeah, is why it's such fun.
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth saying though that it's always more interesting to talk about the bad than the good. It always sort of it gets people's attention more. But he doesn't actually think we're doomed to be in
No.
despair. He just talks about despair a lot as almost a way of pointing out what it would be like. But if you draw a negative space, you can point out what the other space looks like. He spends a lot of time creating characters and writing, because he always writes in character, writing from the point of view of a character who's in despair, and he's hoping that something will wake up in you and you'll be like, am I like that? Do I want to be like that guy? I think I don't. What can I do?
Yeah, that's very much the tone I got kind of reading some time ago now. The sickness and to death thing, in that's what it would be like if there was no solution. If you were stuck like that, it'd be awful. But actually, it starts with that; it doesn't end with it.
Mm-hmm. Gary, how do
Interesting.
you
So,
think that relates to Buddhism? Do you think that Buddhism is fundamentally an existentialist philosophy?
It's funny because I've been thinking about this a lot the past week or so, and I mean, I remember when I was doing my PhD, and a lot of the experts in Buddhism who I was talking to at the time were like, it's a waste of time trying to draw these parallels between Buddhist thought and existentialist thought, and it's not really about that. But actually, the more I think about it, the more parallels I think I see.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
although the
like what?
paths might be a little bit different. So, well, I wrote something down before about this actually. So, from what I can gather, I mean, please correct me because I'm by no means an expert with Kierkegaard at all. So I think the framing is slightly different, but it starts off, like you say, he starts off with this issue. You know, what is life about? What does it mean? What can I do to fix it? So I think straight away there's some sort of parallel there, which is not necessarily surprising. You know, you can find parallels with this stuff in lots of philosophy, lots of religious stuff. But then the way in which um, he seems to talk about how to fix this and the whole kind of leap of faith thing and that sort of stuff, I think marrying up what you know about the world, internalizing it, working with it for some sort of inner transformation. Would you say that's a fair characterization?
Well, what it makes me think of is the poison arrow sutta
Yeah,
that uh, if the Buddha says if you're shot with an arrow and you say I would really like to know if the man who shot me with the arrow had brown hair or blonde hair,
yeah,
you're not playing with a full deck.
yeah.
You
You're
should
asking
try
the
and
wrong
pull that arrow
questions.
out.
Yeah,
And I think that's something that Kierkegaard would be entirely in agreement with, that we're not trying to answer questions. And in fact, he would even add, you're asking those questions because you're too chicken to pull the arrow out. Like
right.
it's not only don't you need to ask those questions, but the very act of asking the questions is making your situation worse. When I first studied this in college, I don't know if people still read this. There was a professor named Potter who made a distinction between map philosophies and path philosophies. So the map philosophy is trying to, tell you where everything is, but the path philosophy says, I don't really care where everything is. I'm going to tell you how to get from where you are to someplace else.
Yeah,
I would tend to agree with that. I don't know if it's old fashioned, but that existentialism and Buddhism are both path philosophies.
yeah. I think I would agree with that too. And addressing a similar sort of thing in a similar sort of way. In that, yeah, I would agree with that. Dave? Do you think that's a fair
Yeah, I
characterization?
mean, I'm torn in two ways, really. I mean, ultimately, I think I probably agree in that existentialism and certain types of Buddhist thought have an awful lot in common, and that disavowal of metaphysical questions in some Buddhist traditions, because
Yeah,
when it kind of institutionalizes a religion, it seems it suddenly starts throwing out metaphysical theories all over the place, and you've been blogging and live streaming a lot about that, Gary, recently. But
yeah,
I mean, the reason I'm torn is because when I was an undergraduate back in the previous century, you could find in the library or in journals books comparing any kind of philosophy you particularly were interested in and saying it was like Buddhism or in Buddhism. And I've got a half-finished article, which is about 25 years old, called Karma Chameleon, which is even more about the chameleon-like quality of Buddhism to Western philosophers that people could find. Oh well, if you're interested in Levinas, or if you're interested in Plato, you could find something. And you say so. Buddhism actually either A supports it, and there's that whole kind of
yeah,
selected kind of ancient wisdom sticker that people want to
Hmm.
put on and use that for. And then with people, obviously, the diverse religions of sort of thousands of years and millions of people, you might well find one little pocket that supports your particular preference in it. But it was a real kind of vogue for a while to
Hmm.
suggest that your particular interest in philosophy was so that makes me a little bit anxious.
Hmm.
I was thought to call it karma chameleon. Partly because Boy George, of course, has been on and off following kind of Soka Gakkai Nichiren Buddhism in recent years for quite a substantial time as one of its many, but not only, celebrity followers. Um, but I think in the case of existentialism, there is a stronger case to be made, especially for the kind of Pali canonical
yeah,
terminologies that I'm interested in, and in certain later ones as well that I know less well. But in those texts, and the arrow image and lots of others are really pertain to that, and like the kind of if you think of the unanswered questions that occur in that kind of canonical literature, where the Buddha refuses to get into stuff, much to the frustration not only of his immediate audience, but of the commentary writers of the next few centuries, who then suggest all sorts of answers to those questions and commit the very kind of errors that one might presume that character is trying to resist
yeah,
committing. Again, and saying it doesn't matter if the world is created or not uncreated. If you're your finite life, when you're able to do something about it, is bleeding away minute by minute. You know, what's that kind of Zen thing about practice like this hair is on fire? Kind of, this is
Yeah.
it's urgent to do something about it. And I think that is quite a nice comparison with the Kierkegaardian thing, is that we will live a life of despair and misery, like the kind of he worries about, unless you take some action. You live more fully, you know, and that's what existentialist philosophers kind of somewhat different what that well-lived, authentic life might be, and Kierkegaard is more of a religious solution to that thing. But it's still, they still need to kind of philosophize while their hair is on fire.
Interesting. And it's like, I mean, then how would you sort of how would you sort of understand that what's your engagement with the reality then? Because what I think Kierkegaard would mean is more of like is very realist in terms of his approach, where he would not add uh, he would not add the very Indianized version of Maya into understanding or interacting with the real world or the world we live in. Then how would you sort of approach to that context in comparing sort of Kierkegaard and Buddhism in how do they engage with the reality and still perceive some commonalities and some differences?
Well, first, the Buddhists wouldn't most Buddhists wouldn't give two hoots about Maya either. It tends to be not only, but it tends to be a very sort of Hindu Vedic notion. So especially the early Buddhists didn't talk much about it at all. And Mahayanists a little bit more, but not so much. So this idea of an active or semi-active kind of shroud is not so much a thing for the Buddhists. So yeah, they would be reluctant to overpopulate ontology with these little concepts too. But what they still think is an issue would be ignorance. And that's different. Like ignorance, Maya, the Hindu logic goes, stems from ignorance. And for the Buddhists, Maya, we can forget about, but we are kind of ignorant. And the ignorance is the root of our dissatisfaction, right? The root of the suffering. So addressing that ignorance one way or another is the key. As for how they view reality, I've been thinking a lot about this the past week or so, especially after a little dispute with someone online.
I hope you won.
Well, I mean, I don't think I did. I don't think either of us did, but it was productive, so it was cool. And I think actually engaging with reality, it's tough to pin down for Buddhists because on the one hand, the Buddhists want to say, and this is where I think there's an implied metaphysic, even in the really early stuff, they want to say that the vision of the world, the vision of suffering, the vision of the creation of the universe through karma and stuff is accurate. But it's kind of sneaking stuff in through the back door at the same time. Do we want to buy that? Is that actually what reality looks like? Or are we tweaking our understanding of reality in the moment to sort of fit in with a preferred Buddhist view? And I think a lot of sort of modern Buddhists might be doing that. And I think I might have done that at certain points in the past, actually. So yeah, the engage with reality, I don't know.
I'm so tempted to say this, and I'm worried it's a cop-out, so I want you to call me on it if it's a cop-out. But I feel like it's all about upaya, that whatever you're going to say about reality, if it's going to help you overcome suffering, go ahead and say it. If you think it's real and that helps you, say that. If you think it's not real, go ahead and say that. And the question, like, what is it really? Don't worry about that question. I've had conversations with Buddhists who say, once you realize that everything is empty, you'll have all this love for everybody. I've said to them the following question: it's like, if I hear a child crying next door, I'm going to have a lot of love. I'm going to want to do something about it. But if I go next door and it's just a record player, and I realize that there is no child, I'm not going to have more more love. I'm going to have less. I'm going to be more disaffected. So,
Yeah,
so I think there's a sort of a practice of being existentially transformed by the Dharma, and it leads to, it's supposed to really change the way you experience your life and other people, and
yeah,
make you. And if what you have to say about reality is helping you get there, do it in good health. And if it's not, stop doing it. Is that a cop out though?
I
I
mean, I
mean,
think,
it
yeah,
feels a little
yeah.
easy.
There's a I mean, I think we'd be wary not to forget that much of early Buddhist texts, or the early Buddhist Pali canon, and the earliness is a kind of problematic concept, but many of those kind of texts spend their whole time saying that they're right and other people are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yeah,
and the
categorically.
common tradition, yeah, and then the Buddhist view is right, and all these other people, but even not just in common texts, but in kind of an awful lot of canonical core
Yeah,
kind of, they are demonstrating why other people who were competitors of the Buddha are idiots, and he's
Well,
not, and
but
he was
in a
right there.
sense, aren't
And
you happy? Because if they thought everybody else was right, why would they bother to write these long books? You know.
yeah, now, yeah,
that's true.
and, there's that kind of thing. Of course, they thought they were right because they wouldn't be kind of following this tradition. But also, it sounds. I'm trying to remember the particular kind of citation reference for the quote from Nietzsche, who says, well, so why truth? Why not rather untruth?
Hmm.
And why should untruth? It said instead of the truth or falsity of a statement, you should consider the extent to which it is life preserving,
Mm-hmm.
life
Yeah,
enhancing, species preserving. That's kind of old translation, but that's the kind of an alternative way of seeing a judgment. A kind of thing. Does it make things better for you? Does it enhance life? Does it kind of add to, and I think that's kind of the inversion of that in the kind of what you might argue is a kind of inverted utilitarian ethic. Does it make things less awful to believe
Mm-hmm.
that in the Buddhist view? Does it make life less drenched in misery to take these kind of views and things? So I think there is that sense to what, and that's the similarly in the kind of the raft and much of the kind of Theravada Buddhist understanding of views and of ditti and of beliefs and opinions, to say they're for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of clinging.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
and then
no belief captures reality fully.
Right.
exactly.
Because they're by humans, they're flawed linguistic constructions. They're bound not to match some, and they're all from a situational kind of epistemic position. So they can't capture everything, but they might work for us and get us somewhere
Mm-hmm.
better, take us to a transformatory place. So beliefs for the purpose of getting us somewhere. The beliefs themselves are not the things that when as it said in the raft simile, this is when you get to the farther shore, you don't take the raft with you anymore. You abandon it. It's done its work. Those beliefs are neither true or untrue in that fuller sense, because that's not where you are anymore. But they're fundamental in getting you there and thinking, in the process of crossing over, it's important to realise that kindness is more important. I know it's one of our themes for this evening. Kindness is more important than cruelty. You won't cross over without that kind of view. But that's just that's just one way of describing an ethical universe. It's not. It doesn't kind of capture it in any fundamental sense, in the sense of excluding all other interpretations and expressions of it. Sorry, that was a mini rant about that. Go
No,
on,
no,
please.
I love that, and I think it's true. One of the things that I think helps you see the truth of what you just said is when you say, "Does that view match reality?" You would have to say along what axis, right? Like two cars can
Exactly.
be the same color, they can be the same suit. They can match according to suit. They can
Yeah,
match according to the number on them. They can match
Mhm.
according to what they're made out of. They can match according to how old they are. So if you're looking at two items and you want to say, do they match? You say, well, in some respects they do, in some respects they don't. So I think we can apply the same analysis to a sentence and what the sentence purports to match. It matches it in some ways. It fails to match it in other ways. I think I'm down with that. I don't know. I hope it doesn't cause a fracas.
I think when I was studying this stuff initially at Liverpool, incidentally, I was totally comfortable with that sort of thing. Totally comfortable. And it's much to the chagrin of kind of the analytics in the department who don't like that ambiguity. But I think actually the ambiguity is part of the point, almost. Because like you were just saying, Dave, ultimately, if you've got this sure, hard and fast view, eventually you're going to run into problems with it. And the Buddhist perspective is if you cling to that too much, it doesn't matter if it's right in the moment, it's going to cause you problems somewhere down the line. And they were worried about this. I mean, the Mahayanists were worried about this as early as the sort of back end of the first, start of the second century, when Nagarjuna, who we can assume was educated in the Sarvastivada Abhidharma tradition mostly, came along and said, you're sticking to these views. At this point, the dogmas don't match experience anymore, and this is causing you more bother. So what we should do is just abandon these views. And I'm going to use the tetralemma, to prove to you logically why all these propositions ultimately are meaningless, and you shouldn't bother sticking to them. And, for the longest time, that's nonsense, and the classical logicians are absolute nonsense. I had a conversation myself with Philip Goff at the Christmas party one time, and I was telling him about sort of the Nagarjunayan refutation of strong metaphysics, and he was like, "No, he's missing the point." Like, no, but he thinks that everybody else is missing the point. Like, even now, you're really close to these positions, and it's offensive to you that someone might say, "That's rubbish. Like, why are you wasting your time with that?" And for someone like Nagarjuna, it's a legitimate concern. Why are you so held up over here on this scholastic stuff when you could be doing something to improve your life and make the experience better, not just for you, but for everybody else? So I think it was a realistic concern super early on, which is a lot of the arguments I've been having the past 2 weeks.
Interesting. Then how would we sort of go on with the idea of detachment? What's like Kierkegaard's understanding of detachment? Is it
He doesn't
sort
like
of
detachment. He tends to think that detachment is a trick you play on yourself to avoid feeling pain. And like one simple way of saying Kierkegaard, I don't think he quite says it this way himself, but my graduate advisor Bert Dreyfus said it this way: is you have a choice. You can have a meaningful not life or a life that is protected against pain, and you cannot have both. And he thinks that many people tragically take the sort of devil's bargain and they say, I would like to protect myself against any pain. But the fine print of that devil's bargain, which they don't read, is you will therefore have a life that has no joy at all. And Kierkegaard says, don't do that. Have a life that has agony and joy. That's how you should live your life. And he does not think that detachment is the path. Not for him.
then what would a Buddhist reply to that?
Depends on the Buddhist, I guess. What do you guys think?
I think it depends on the Buddhist too. And I think it depends probably what school they're from and what era they're sort of adhering to. Yeah, it's hard, especially I think with the later development of something like the Bodhisattva ideal, where the idea is that you are a Buddha or close to becoming a Buddha, and you stick around to sort of make things better for other people. Then full detachment certainly doesn't seem to work with that, because why would they be concerned with what other people are feeling? Why would they care at all? I know some of the earlier Hindu traditions were hung up on complete detachment and world renunciation. And I've spoke to you, Jay, especially about this before, the sort of problem with, or the perceived problem with the early Shramana traditions and total withdrawal from the world. It might be okay for you, maybe, but it certainly isn't very good for everybody else. And it leads to, the argument is, and Isaiah Berlin worried about this too, called it the retreat to the inner citadel, I think, right? You're so concerned with focusing on meditating your way to enlightenment or whatever that you ignore all the nasty stuff going on in the world around you.
I want to make a joke, which is I know plenty of people who, if they would withdraw from the world, it would be great for everybody else. You're making an optimistic assumption about what kind of impact the person is having on the world before they withdraw. But that's just a joke. I'm sorry.
I mean,
Selective enforced monasticism on cities.
Yes. Yeah, I
yes,
can think of a few people in the United States that it's like, put them in a monastery, please.
I mean,
yeah,
I think Buddhism has a problem with this in many traditions, and it's a real tension between
yeah,
the kind of desire and the Bodhisattva epitomize this most strongly in compassion. And there's there's quite a good little book called How Buddhism Began by Richard Gombrich, who was an exceptionally argumentative man, in all sorts of ways, only well. But
He
also
was a
black and white.
sweetheart when I met him.
Sorry?
He was a sweetheart when I met him in 2020.
That's mellowed a bit. But there's a really good chapter in that yellow book, How Buddhism Began, it's called How Insight Worsted Compassion in the Early Pali Canon. And it's a really good little chapter about the fact there was already tension there. And actually then in the combinatorial tradition, and the kind of fixing of the Theravada orthodoxy that happens in that kind of period. The people who wanted to argue for insight and a slight more quietism seemed to get the upper hand. Obviously, this caused a bit of a pushback over time and the reassertion of a kind of engagedness and compassion. But also, I think there's a stereotype the West is all too happy to place on Buddhism over being quietist and retreatist anyway. So those tendencies are in some bits of Buddhism and all sorts of tendencies in such a diverse and complicated old religion. But those ones are the ones that get the airtime, as it were, in the kind of Western imagination and projection of a type of Buddhism. And of course, if you look in those of Buddhist texts and even Pali texts, you will find that. You'll also find huge discussions of zest and vim and vigor, as it's translated in the kind of slightly older translations, that are necessary for the work that has to be done in self and other transformation. And it is not just a kind of lazy retreat from experience, but a kind of an enthusiastic engagement with it. So I think there are the intellectual kind of resources in those traditions for thinking of that. But there are also in there, without question, the Shramanist traditions you talk about of the renunciant, and the life of the Buddha as it's painted in those texts is modelled on pre-existing notions of renouncers, and is then post-imagined back through that similar lens. So Buddhism is always a sort of an interesting relationship with the idea of complete renunciation, and it waxes and wanes by region, by time period, by tradition as well. But again, all too often it's seen as a kind of a simplistic lens that's used from outside of the traditions to see into it. But I'm not sure they ever go quite as far as the kind of Kierkegaardian idea that the only thing worse than a life dominated by passion is one without it.
Would either of you like to engage with the Vajrayana in this discussion now?
I don't know. I don't feel like I can speak authoritatively enough on it to add anything of value, to be honest.
I mean, the only thing I'm kind of saying in terms of it is in relation to kind of desire, that element of kind of circle. That's what I kind of wrote about back some while ago now. But in that sense, one stimuli or image to be used for that is things of rather than the kind of cutting off of desire, or the gentle redirecting of desire and retooling of desire you get in some traditions, but it seems to be more a kind of an enthusiastic reharnessing of desire to drive it in the opposite direction. You get in some of those Vajrayana traditions, or a kind of short circuiting of it through overwhelming. So it seems to be a kind of using that in a slightly different way in order to still bring the person round to an ultimate understanding of the futility of certain kind of desire, but rather than through a slow refining or slow retooling of that, something more drastic and radical, and the lightning bolt and the kind of instant thing, and therefore the imagery in those traditions, which is so powerful and evocative, often erotic or demonic or dangerous, and all those things attempt to kind of to shock us out of it. The idea that you shouldn't encourage someone to stop smoking by kind of slowly showing them propaganda, but lock them in the garage and make them smoke 20 packets of cigarettes, whatever, that kind of old 60s movie image of how you stop someone's desire for something.
Right.
And that's
There's an
probably about all I
interesting.
feel qualified to say about Adriana as well.
I think that's well said, because there's an interesting paradox, which I think everyone will notice at some point, which is that if you were like, I really want to be free of desire, that's a desire.
Yeah.
So if you're running around being angry at your anger and really lusting for freedom from lust, it's a self-negating project. So if you realize that, you might think, maybe, and I think this comes back to upaya, maybe saying I'm anti-desire, I'm anti the world. Are you really the anti the world, or are you just creating a different world that's based upon your rejection?
Yeah, and this is kind of what I was driving at before. So in this way, you're sort of sculpting experience in a specific way to reach a certain goal.
Mm-hmm.
And the talk about whether that reflects reality or not is kind of superfluous to that project, I guess. I did last year. I had a spell of reading a lot of Milarepa's poetry. So he's the tantric yogi Tibetan, and he was the first person I thought of, Dave, when you were talking then about being quite forceful and aggressive, sometimes quite sexy with it, and this is a total redirection, and probably wholly different to the Indian Mahayana traditions, but in the Tibetan traditions, much more sort of readily accessible. So yeah,
Well, there's the Vimalakirti Sutra, right?
Yeah.
Which says that the Bodhisattva is actually sort of in the world. Now, I don't know if it's fair to say he's in the world but not of it, because maybe I don't really know what that means. But it's certainly an image of a spiritually advanced person who goes to the casinos.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's funny you say that about not really knowing what that means. I read something, when was it? A couple of weeks ago, about it might have been in Analayo's new book about the perfection of wisdom and its relation to the Pali Canon. Anyway, he said in there something very similar to that. And the early Bodhisattva stuff about the Buddha says he's kind of that thing, he's in the world but not of it. And that is the question. Well, what does that actually mean? Like, is he there? What's he doing? Has he gone somewhere else? Is he then not human anymore? Is it a fully spiritual thing? Is there a life force? And I think that sort of, it's a very difficult question that I think sort of throws up more problems than it solves, actually. So I like that characterization of it, where it's just kind of spiritually advanced, just there doing it, rather than the sort of hippy dippy stuff around. He's not really of this world, because I can't make any sense of that. And when I've asked other people more knowledgeable than me, and even some monastics more knowledgeable than me, to explain that, I don't think you ever really get a satisfactory response, to be honest. Maybe somebody's got one and I just don't know it. But I've never had one that I thought, yeah, that makes sense. It's always been a bit wishy-washy to me.
Interesting.
Right. It also reminds me of T.S. Eliot, teach us to care and not to care. And I think that's true. And then if you say, well, Thomas, what do you precisely mean by that? You may just not be vibing with it.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? So to some people it makes perfect sense, but to others, completely over the head.
Interesting. And like, how would then the concept of sort of impermanence would be compared? Because I think God also tells a lot about change and transformation as well.
Well, I would hope that every good philosopher notices that things change. So I think he does too. It's true.
Yeah, kind of self-evident thing in the world, right? I don't see why that's controversial. I'm a bit confused by the question, really.
No, so sort of understanding the parallels between what Buddhist understanding of impermanence is, to sort of Kierkegaard's understanding of change and transformation, which is I think very 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 straightforward. But then the Buddhist perspective has much more layers to it, and when it comes to sort of understanding their concept of impermanence.
Well, I think Kierkegaard and the Buddhists are both interested in change as a cause of suffering. That if you care about something which could go away,
Absolutely.
that's a challenging position to be in. And what are you going to do about that? I think that's both. They're both interested in that question more than characterizing how much. I mean, sure, things change. That's true.
Yeah, but I think that's exactly right. I mean, I don't know about whether you'd agree with this, Dave, I think, again, this boils down to where you look along the Buddhist timeline as to how much emphasis a Buddhist tradition places on impermanence and exactly what that emphasis is. Because in the early days, I think you're more looking towards what you were saying, Eric, really. And then as we start to get a bit of scholasticism creeping in, we start thinking about atomic particles and the impermanence of the world, and a whole metaphysics springs up that maybe it was implied in the early texts, but it's certainly not fleshed out. And it's hard to make the argument from the early stuff that it's that significant, I think. So, yeah, the impermanence thing in Buddhism is kind of not a fully settled issue, and it depends on the tradition. It depends where you look, who you read, as to how they want to understand it. Some people are just going to say everything in the world changes, whereas other people are going to start talking about dharmas popping in and out of existence or existing in 3 times and stuff like this.
If you're trying to become a monk, the old way of doing it was they would say to you, here's 5 things that you should think about: your skin, your nails, the hair on your head, the hair on your body, and your teeth. Now go away and think about that really hard. And I think the reason why they pick those things is that they're aspects of your body that remind you that you are impermanent. Your teeth
Yeah.
will fall out, your hair will fall out, your skin is constantly sloughing off. So that's the kind of impermanence all of them care about. They may
Yes.
express other things, but they all care about the fact that, so what you gonna do? You're gonna live your life adorning your body? Well, bad news, it's not going to be around so long. So what do you want to do about that? That's, I think, a sort of, I can't think of a Buddhist who wouldn't say, well, that's true, you know.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the whole aging, illness, death thing,
Mm-hmm.
there's the core sort of principles driving the Buddha in the first instance.
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely slots in with that.
I'm more kind of I don't know. I see the kind of impermanence as more present in those kind of canonical text. Maybe through the kind of not self-teaching. I know there's been kind of a move to kind of push back against the idea that Buddhism teaches this quite as strongly as some of us still argue it does.
Yeah.
And it says partly because it's felt like it's a functional teaching, and that doesn't necessarily only automatically diminish its potential truth value, as some people seem to think. But I think it is fundamentally a functional teaching. I always think of the funeral ground meditation in Buddha, where he talks about, where the person is meant to looking at a recently deceased body and saying, the only difference in that and you is time.
Yeah.
And that's great, lovely
By the way, if
midnight
I
kind of
predeceased
reflections.
the 3 of you and you want to have my body on the podcast, you're welcome to.
Yeah, it'll be handy.
Amazing.
But I think that finitude is there in many kind of something contemplative traditions and especially existential
Yeah.
ones. The problem is the urgent sort of finitude of mortality. Yeah, and that's where the initial fear and trembling and all these worries that Kierkegaard has are from. What if this is just it and it's gone in a moment anyway? What if there's, that is answered differently by some other existentialist writers that come later, but by Kierkegaard it's answered by the thing that I know what was down on from a conversation we're going to have about the idea of a leap of faith. That you get in Kierkegaard. That's in a sense when he's about to have the leap. They're the kind of worries at his back, pointing at him with a sharp stick to make the leap. In a sense, because the alternative is that it's just a kind of bubble in the foam and gone.
Yeah.
And that's too dreadful for us to consider. It's potentially too much to bear that you make the leap. You don't have to have proof. You just have to see the alternative, and the living as if that the faith is true gives you enough value. I'm not sure that fully captures the kind of more theological kind of sense of Kierkegaard, but I think that's the kind of how the impermanence and finitude as a driver for that kind of thinking.
It's also true that I think, he talks about being in love with someone while you know that the sword is hanging over their head, but not hanging back. So it's a way of living in this world that is on fire, but still opening your heart to it, opening your heart to people and things that you care about.
Yeah, I mean, there's this beautiful qawwali sung by uh, a Muslim singer called Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and uh, I actually got on with a small paragraph of that entire qawwali, which I think depicts a lot about how sort of how how like you said about uh, the sword which is hanging on our head, kind of thing, and it's more of like it says that this it is sort of a conversation between a person who is asking question and want to understand the God in that context, and the person is saying that you've made a very weird picture of this world for me, that you've trapped my soul in the cage of body, and you've also got death to guard the cage.
Huh.
Yeah, and I mean the entire Kavali goes on with multiple dimensions of asking questions and understanding things, but I think this specific aspect is more of the entrapment of, or the fear of death that sort of implies, which is very natural to what our our natural primal mind would see and behave to a certain degree. So what would, like, talking on the leap of faith is like, how would, what do you guys think that is the society sort of we are living in? Is it losing the ability to sort of take a leap of faith? Because we are seeing a lot of things like, you know, have a backup plan. More than backup plan is like ask so many things, because I think Gary just posted something on Facebook or LinkedIn. I don't remember exactly. It's like when people start asking too many unwanted questions, it sort of becomes a more barrier to a smoother flow of work. And I think, what do you guys think of the modern idea of younger generation like me, where we sort of look through 1,000 things, go through a lot of confirmation without actually stepping in and doing something?
Well, so the funny thing is, if you live for another year and you spend every day doing a different thing, and then you die, you have made a leap of faith. You've made the leap of faith that you should spend the year doing 365 different things. Maybe you didn't realize it, and that's possibly too bad that you didn't realize it. But we're making a bet of how to live our lives all the time, and none of us knows we're going to be alive tomorrow. So we made the
Yeah.
bet that we would spend an hour talking with each other on your show. Um, Everybody is always making the decision. If you have a certain amount of freedom, I'm not talking about people who might be like literally enslaved or imprisoned, but you are making decisions about how you wish to spend your life, like it or not. And I think one thing you might say about the modern era, and Kierkegaard certainly would, is that there are more tools available to distract you from that fact. And part of the reason is that a lot of people are making a lot of money
Yeah.
selling us those tools.
But yeah, but also I'm wary of things. I mean, absolutely, totally agree with that. And there's a kind of a whole kind of scourge of kind of people profiting from driving people into kind of less sort of meaningful lives and things. All we could talk about. But also, I think that this idea that there's so much choice now, so people don't know what to think and what path to take, is sometimes kind of overblown. I certainly remember not knowing what to think. I'm sure I'd know what to think now, but certainly as an undergraduate and kind of as my initial kind of postgraduate studies, not people think, well, you must have all these kind of philosophical opinions, and I really didn't. I would read one book telling me a very hard kind of anti-realist point of view. I think, yeah, that's really convincing. This person's got the answer. then read a book completely disagreeing with it and think, oh, this person's got the answer. And still in such a kind of good writing, you can be convinced almost anything by a sufficiently well written kind of thesis on it, and account. So I think the idea that we are kind of pulled this way and that by the sheer thing of information is true to anyone who's lived in an age when they can access libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of relative free thought within at least some kind of spectrum within that. So I think it's easy to kind of demonize young people and the kind of generations as they come along. It's a phenomenon of people getting older to get more enthusiastic about that demonization of younger people. But actually, there've always been the option for many people. There've been the opportunities to have a freedom of thought and to be dragged all sorts of different ways and not know what to commit to and try and I was thinking of the first book in the Age of Reason trilogy, the Sartre novels, where the character in that, he wants to be free, so he never commits to anything. And then, of course, that is shown to be not actually living at all and not really understanding what his freedom is. Freedom is the freedom to commit. The people who are engaging with their freedom, the ones who are choosing to have a baby, to be his friend Boris, to be in the kind of in the party, whatever it is. And this idea that he wants no commitments and no engagements and nothing that makes him do anything is just a kind of him expressing his freedom, but the other people who are committed and engaged in social and political activities, various sorts, are just as free. So I think this idea of people resisting committing to anything to retain their kind of freedom is not new, and it's been kind of much remarked upon and philosophically engaged with previously as well. So I think it's kind of interesting, though, that people often push that on younger people, the current generation.
I largely agree with that, actually. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, actually. The young people accused of lots of things, indecision and not really knowing what's going on, and not committing is one of them. It's not what I see every day, the young people I work with. So it's, I mean, I 100% take the point that there's lots of distractions, but I still think it's possible to filter that out. And I still think that actually a lot of people do filter that out, and they are aware of what their interests are, and they are aware of where the passions lie. Even if I see this a lot at the university, they're not quite pursuing them, or there's a bit of a delay to them pursuing exactly what they want, but they've got an awareness of what they are, and a lot of the time they have a little pathway thought out about how to be able to get there. So I think in some ways, it's a concern, especially with the amount of stuff that's being sold to us, pushed on us. Look over here, look over there. I totally accept all that. I fall foul of it all the time. I'm easily distracted every day. But the things that I care about are still there, I think. And if it comes to a choice between being distracted by these things over there or doing something, for example, with my missus or with the little fella, I'm going to choose that every time. And there's no contest. And I think for a lot of young people as well, they still have those sharp lines drawn where they'll always go. So I don't think it's as tragic or as worrying as all that, to be honest.
Nice.
I don't know what you think, Jamie. You are the young person of the group, I suppose.
Nice. I mean, it's almost an hour, and I think Eric has to leave. So just before going off, just like to thank you guys for doing it. I mean, it's really an honor for me to have all three of you in one frame and talking, and it's almost like I'm sitting in front of three experts and just sitting and simply learning from what they speak and what they talk. So seriously, thank you so much, guys, for doing this and giving your time. And just before going, just a small request I would like to do to every one of you is like, if you guys can just share one thing which you've learned from all your philosophy and life in general, which you would say is like, this is the most highlighted learning or lesson, if I would like to impart or share to anyone. Because I want to learn, I want to be even 1% of what you guys are.
I'll go with something. I don't think it's something I've learned through philosophy, but it's something that I've learned through life. It's two things, which is really don't sweat the small stuff, and also look after the people around you. And if you can help somebody out, do it. And that I try to live like that, and it works for me.
David?
And I'm not really kind of sure I'd like to have it, especially as I'm still being harassed by a cat, as you can intermittently see. There was the attempt to knock the only lamp in this room on the floor before we kind of close. But I would go back to my previous point about saying kind of practice like your hair is on fire in terms of urgency, in terms of if there are things you want to achieve. You may well, we may well not see another, someone's may not see another summer or not see another whatever it might be. So if it matters enough to really matter, then it matters now. Would be the kind of, and that's from the message of the kind of things we've been kind of talking about. Excuse me, just move it. But she has more important things to say than me, I imagine. She's going to just eat or kill.
Brilliant,
Yeah, I
brilliant.
think I would offer that if you go into encounters with other human beings, it's worth it to lower the defensiveness, to protect yourself a little less and be open to what they have, at least as to what they have to offer and what they have to share, at least as a first move. And then if they turn out to be a dangerous, toxic person, you can definitely lift those defenses up again. But I think if your initial move is a move of openness and love and not self-protection, it's a good move.
I think that's super relevant at the moment as well. Yeah,
Brilliant.
fab
Thank you
advice.
so much, guys. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And please be in touch. I would love to learn a lot from each and every one. Thank you so much for
Thanks so
joining
much
me.
for having us,
Thank you.
Jay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Awesome.
Thank you. Nice to meet you both.
Thanks a
You
lot.
Bye-bye.
too, finally. Cheers.
Cheers.